Good morning, Assistant Professor Dr. Akraponime Hall and Chair of ELT Program, Buriram Rajabhat University, and also Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and Assistant Professor Dr. Canberra Park Internal Secretary of ELT Program, our invited speaker, Dr. Ashok Thorat, Director of Institute of Advanced Studies in English, Pune, India, all my classmates, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anteso, a PhD student from Batch 3 ELT program, and I'll be your MCs for today's webinar. Today's webinar, entitled Intercultural Communication for ELT in the Perspectives of Pragmatic Discourse Analysis, is hosted by ELT program under the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Buriram Rajabhat University, Thailand. For the webinar, let me read out today's agenda. This webinar will be officially opened by the welcome speech by Chairman of ELT program, and followed by special lecture. As usual, ladies and gentlemen, during the webinar, we have our 10 or 15-minute break, and after the lecture, we have question and answer sections before the end of this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start webinar. So we are very honored to invite Chairman of ELT program and also Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Dr. Akraponime Hall, to give a welcoming speech.
Namaste to our invited speaker.
Namaste.
Greeting, we say Namaste. Mingkalaba to my Burmese student, and Ni hao ma to my Thai student, and Sawadee Club to my colleague, Dr. Kampira Phap. Xin chào from Vietnam. So you might be hearing the airline announcement because now I'm at the airport in Da Nang, Vietnam.
Oh,
I was supposed to fly within 30 minutes. I'm very lucky to have a good chance, good opportunity to come and deliver a thankful message to our invited speaker today. It is a very honor for us to have the director of Institute of Advanced Studies in English, Pune, that is Dr. Ashok Thorat. We've been to visit him in Pune, India, I think last few years before COVID pandemic. By the time he organized very big international conference, and luckily, he's very kind for us to get our paper published in his journal as well. I still remember that so nice moment to have a very academic talk with Dr. Ashok in Pune. Not easy to invite him to give a special talk to students. Dr. Kampi tried his very hard to have him with us now online. And we highly hope to have him in person at BRU campus very soon. Now, 3 Chinese students already with us at BRU Thailand, and we are waiting for the other student from Myanmar. This is Ong Tae-su. All right, we highly hope to have 4 of them. And also, we would like to have Dr. Ashok with us in person at BRU in the near future. His talk today is very interesting and also very trendy. Some of scholars in Vietnam, where I presented my paper, also presented about intercultural communication. I met Professor, Vietnamese professor from Hanoi. He very expert in pragmatics and discourse analysis, like Professor Ashok today. His talk today is to be about intercultural communication for ELT in the perspective of pragmatic and discourse analysis. Very interesting. I think some of you here in this session also interested in conducting a research relevant to pragmatics and discourse analysis as well, applicable to ELT. Not just a PhD student today, also we have our academic colleagues from other universities. They are also interested in this. They are welcome to share things, to share academic things with us. And on behalf of Buriram Rajabhat University President, I just informed her, Associate Professor Malini Jitopama, that we are going to have Dr. Ashok today. She just asked me to send her thankful message to Dr. Ashok as well. So on her behalf, and also on behalf of my faculty, I am as the Dean. I have so many hats, and also the chairperson of PhD program. I would like to thank you very so much, my students, my colleague Dr. Kampi, and of course, I would like to invite all of you, please join me in applause to welcome our event speaker from India, Professor Ashok Thorat. Thank you very so much, and please allow me to take this chance to declare the webinar officially open. Enjoy your webinar. Thank you. All the best. ขอบคุณและสวัสดีครับ
Thank you,
Rajabhat.
Dr. Chakrapan. It was nice seeing you after a long gap.
Yes,
Thank you,
thank you so
Professor.
much.
Yeah, before the webinar, let me introduce our invited speaker with a brief biography. Professor Dr. Ashok Thorat is the founder director of Institute of Advanced Studies in English. After Pune is a research institute and postgraduate college. He's also the founder of Center for Digital Humanities 2013, and also a founder member of the HARTI. This is Digital Humanities Alliance for Research and Teaching Innovation. He is also a member of many academic institutions like SPUU and DCDU, Academic Council, and KLE. And he has published over 40 papers, written 14 books, and edited 3 textbooks, and produced 24 CDs on phonetics. He participated in more than 202 national and international conferences and gave more than 100 keynote addresses. His areas of interest are teacher training, pragmatics, communication, digital humanities, and research. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me welcoming our invited speaker, Dr. Ashok Thorat, with applause.
Thank you. Thank you for your welcome. And do I begin now?
Yes, Professor.
Yes. Professor Kamfi, I think we have to continue for about 3 clock hours, right?
Yes, sir.
And do we take a break for 5 minutes or 10 minutes in between?
Yeah. One and a half you can.
After 1.5 hours, right? Fine. Let me formally begin with the speech and presentation.
Sir, please excuse me. I will leave this session for within 5 minutes as opposed to
Yes. You
fly
have
back to Thailand. Thank you so much once again.
But
Hope to
anyway,
see you in Thailand very soon.
so nice of you to
Namaskar,
spare your
see you,
time
bye-bye.
for us. Bye. And happy journey.
Thank you.
Right. At the outset, let me thank BRU authorities and particularly Dr. Akrapan and Dr. Kampirafa Bintanu for providing me an opportunity to interact with the doctoral students of BRU who are pursuing their PhD in ELT. And I believe most of them have incorporated the element of intercultural communication or discourse analysis or pragmatics in their research. I have always enjoyed talking to BRU students. Today, I believe there are research scholars from various countries like Thailand, China, and Myanmar, talking to a multicultural group of enlightened students like you. And that too on a topic like intercultural communication is both a thrill as well as a challenge for me. Please feel free to interact and raise questions whenever you like. The topic demands an exploration in the field of intercultural communication through the lenses of pragmatics and discourse analysis. Three areas apparently separate fields of study are in fact quite interlinked and in some sense inseparable from each other. To begin with, let us have some working definitions of all the three. That is intercultural communication, pragmatics, and discourse analysis. And then we'll start talking about how they merge, how they interact with each other, how they are interconnected. I'll share my screen so that you find easier to follow me. Yes. Intercultural communication actually refers to the communication between people from two different cultures. It's a symbolic, interpretive, transactional, contextual process in which people from different cultures create shared meaning. These keywords I'm going to visit every now and then throughout my speech. The keywords like shared meaning, different cultures, context, etc. Discourse analysis is concerned mainly with the study of the functions that language performs when used in a speech, or writing. This is just a working definition. We are going to delve deep into each of these areas after some time. Pragmatics is generally defined as a study of language in use or study of utterances in their context. And I'm going to discuss these definitions. I'm going to discuss these views or perceptions of these three areas with the help of examples. And that will make things clearer. If you read between lines, all the three are concerned with creating a shared meaning. In fact, for pragmatics, for discourse analysis, as well as for intercultural communication, shared meaning is central. They all endeavor to create shared meaning, understand shared meaning, and how shared meaning is created will be discussed very soon. And the shared meaning is created in a given cultural or intercultural context. This is never out of cultural context. So cultural context is again a central theme of today's discussion. Communication itself is seen as a semiotic event, and the fruitfulness of any communication depends on mutual understanding, recognition, that is mutual recognition, shared knowledge, and cultural insights. So mutual recognition, mutual understanding, shared knowledge, cultural insights, these create a kind of foundation for a fruitful communication. This is the foundation of language use in any communicative situation. We therefore need to understand how communication works and where it intersects with pragmatics and discourse analysis. And then move on to intercultural communication that has one significant additional dimension of interculturality. So communication in general, how it is related to discourse, how it is related to pragmatics, and then how we move on to intercultural communication will be a kind of progression of my presentation. So let us see how communication works. Even if you look at it at a general level, you would agree with me that communication is much more than a simple transmission of information. It is neither just the use of language, nor it is just transmission of information. It is much more than that. And to put it in simple words, it is the mutual creation of meaning. The word mutual is very important here because both the interlocutors, whatever culture they represent, whatever situation they represent, whatever context they represent, they endeavor to create a common meaning or shared meaning. Now, interlocutors have different contexts and they are creating a shared meaning. So look at the variety of factors that must be intruding here. Two interlocutors coming from two different contexts, first of all, need to understand each other, need to understand each other's cultural background, need to recognize each other, and then need to understand their needs of face, needs of esteem, needs of goals, and whatever. And then they can succeed in creating this shared knowledge or common meaning in a fruitful manner. Information is, in fact, in itself meaningless. It is only when information is intended and interpreted in some way that it attains significance. Otherwise, information in itself is meaningless. For instance, if you are telling me about a movie, maybe a movie you saw last week, and you are telling me your experience, probably you intend for me to understand what the movie is about and something what your experience and evaluation of it is. You pose the information in a language I know, use references to concepts and other films I might know, and in conveying your feeling, you assume that I'm able and willing to access your experience. From my part, I try to interpret the information in the way you intended it by using common meanings of words and concepts, and by recognizing both our common experience of similar events and a uniqueness of your personal experience in this particular event. So what we are actually doing, when you're telling me about a film that you saw last week, you are giving me some information, you are interpreting that information in your own way, and you're sharing your experience. And I'm trying to understand your experience, feel your experience. I'm trying to get the information that you are sharing with me, and that information obviously will get transformed at my cognitive level. So at the mental level, lots of things happen. This is like playing game of chess. You know chess, there are just two players and a board between two of them. No one talks to anyone. Just movement of a pawn from one house to the other, or rook from one house to the other, hardly 1 inch movement. But imagine what must be happening at the mental level. At the mental level, the two players, the players of chess, they're trying to understand each other. They're trying to delve deep into the minds of each other. They're trying to anticipate. They're trying to guess. They're trying to create a chain of moves. They're trying to create attack, counter attack. So interpretation, understanding, assumptions, predictions, anticipations, variety of things are happening at the mental level in the mind of both the players. So this communication is also like playing game of chess. You're trying to understand each other. You're trying to probe into each other's mind. You're trying to recognize each other. You're trying to place each other in a proper context. Then and then alone this shared meaning or common meaning can be created. So this is what is communication. I will use a simple example from pragmatics to make this clearer. Let's examine the utterance. I am here now. Very simple to understand. Just 4 words. I am here now. Forget about its structure, right? Structurally, you know, there's a syntagmatic chain and this is present tense and so on and so forth. These 4 words put in a particular syntagmatic order are apparently easy to understand. The complexity lies in the context, and coincidentally, meanings also emerge from the context, not from the words. This is the basic premise of discourse analysis, basic premise of pragmatics, and we must keep this in mind, that meanings emerge from the context, not from the words. Words have static meanings, dictionary meanings, literal meanings. So, and meaning is a dynamic concept. You will realize this when you substitute the speaker indicated in the personal pronoun I. I am here now. And if you substitute I by different speakers, then you will realize how this I becomes dynamic. Or special reference to the preposition here. If you substitute here by different places, like classroom, hospital, police station, then you will realize how this here also is a dynamic concept. Imagine that Dr. Ashok Thorat, that is me, utters these words in today's meeting, that I am here now. The implication would be Dr. Ashok Thorat is going to speak on intercultural communication. Is that clear? And everyone knows this because the program has been announced, the brochure has been circulated, the listeners know what I'm going to speak on. And therefore, when I say I am here now, clearly indicates or implies that Dr. Ashok Thorat is going to speak on intercultural communication. If you imagine that the same Dr. Ashok Thorat uses the same utterance in a hospital during his visit to an ailing friend, it would imply, my dear friend, I am here to help you in every possible way. Maybe I'll even pay your bill if necessary. I'll talk to the doctors. I'll inquire about your reports and so on and so forth. So look, the speaker is the same. The utterance is the same, but implication has changed. The message has changed. The meaning has changed. Similarly,
Dear Professor,
yes.
Let me interrupt. The PowerPoint isn't moving. It just stay on the first slide. So please.
Oh, yes. Oh, what has happened? It's not moving. Cheers. This PowerPoint is not moving. Now it has started moving. Yes. Anyway, I'm still at the first slide only. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Imagine substitution of the speaker now. Suppose the same utterance is being used by a surgeon in the same place, that is hospital. It may imply that he is ready for performing a surgery, right? And this will give you an idea that I am here now doesn't imply the same thing everywhere in case of every speaker, because the words are constant. The syntagmatic relationship is constant. The structure is constant. So meaning emerges from the context. Meaning is never constant. And this dynamism makes meaning-making business a very complex phenomenon. So whether it is verbal or non-verbal, oral or written, communication is a complex phenomenon. Even if it is simply defined as an act of sharing information, the sharing involves several opportunity, challenges, and strategies. And we are going to discuss these in some moments to follow. Any successful communication works at 3 different levels. And they are building relationships, sharing information, and generating action. In fact, a psychologist named Robin Dunbar a few hundred years back believed that language was created out of a human need to build and articulate relationships. He went further to make a statement that one of the basic human needs is to gossip. You know gossip. Gossip is a meaningless talk. Apparently meaningless talk. But gossip helps you create comfort zone. It helps you create rapport. And therefore Dunbar says, the psychologist says, that this need gave rise to language. Now, apparently this is an extreme statement, okay? But it makes sense because human beings must have started using words with the intentions of understanding each other, articulating each other, sharing with each other, and all this begins with gossip. Okay. Now, for example, good morning, good afternoon, these are also formalities. And these are cultural formalities. They may not carry much meaning apart from pleasing each other. But real communication or sharing happens after that. So the first stage is to build relationship. And once the comfort zone is created or rapport is established, at the second level, the interlocutors start sharing information. Sharing as well as transforming information. Because the moment I share something with you, you at your cognitive level transform that information. And when you retell it to someone else, it's a transformed information, not the same information. The transformed information is the mother of ideas that trigger action. This is something very important. And this is the third level of communication. That is generating action. So the journey of language from establishing rapport to triggering action is a fruitful journey that often has magical impact on human lives. Because you first establish relationship, you establish rapport, you feel comfortable, and then you start sharing. This sharing can be any kind of information about business, about research ideas, about research topics, about your interests, about your feelings, about your apprehensions, about your confusions, whatever. And during this sharing, you are obviously at the mental level, at the cognitive level, you are transforming that information, and that gives rise to ideas. And ideas are a currency in the world. They trigger action. In fact, idea has a transformative nature. One idea can transform you from within and outside. One idea can transform a country. One idea can transform a society. So ideas are extremely useful and ideas are very powerful. And these ideas generate action. So communication starts from gossip, to use Dunbar's word, and ends with action. So how useful, how important communication is, we'll understand from this example. And precisely for this reason, communication is seen as a process that is directly linked to the human happiness and success. So this is about communication. Now let us look at discourse. Because the concept of discourse also needs to be put in a proper perspective. Because as researchers, you must have come across different interpretations of discourse. In fact, when I browsed into different sites and checked for the meaning of discourse, I got more and more confused. And I'm sure you must be getting confused too. Because discourse is interpreted in social sciences in one way, in anthropology in another way, In linguistics, in still another way. Pragmatics is still another way. In philosophy, still another way. In psychology, still another way. So discourse, let us try to put it in a proper perspective, keeping our focus in mind. Our focus is intercultural communication. For us, discourse is a process by which we create, relate, organize, and realize meaning. Look at the etymology. It comes from a Latin word called discursus, which means a running about. This illustrates the basic idea of relaying information through the natural rhythm and flow of language. Okay. Discourse is very crucial to how readers understand the world the author is trying to create. If you take a novel, for example, novel presents before you a universe of discourse created by an author, and the discourse helps you understand that universe. So discourse serves to inform and shape how the individual sees the world and how they form a baseline for responding to different concepts. At its most basic, discourse may seem like communication, but communication is how we interact with each other, with ourselves, and with our societies. Written communications, be they novels, poems, notification books, letters, diaries, emails, are records of how a society shares information. They provide insights into why we think the way we do and how we connect with people and ideas. But discourse is entirely context dependent. There are different ways of looking at discourse. Structural linguists talk about 4 different kinds of discourse, like argument, description, exposition, narration. I'll not go into deeper because you know these things and they're available on the internet. Literary critics talk of expressive discourse, poetic discourse, transactional discourse, and so on and so forth. These are the types of discourse. What is important here is distinguishing discourse from text, and that will make my point clearer. When you approach a novel or a poem or a play, you are first exposed to a text. Now the question is text and discourse the same? And the answer is obviously no. The second question is, if the material that you see by your eyes is the same, whether you call it text or discourse, in what way text differs from discourse or discourse differs from text? And these are the parameters along which I distinguish text from discourse. Text is usually a written form of communicative information or communication information, which is a non-interactive in nature. Non-interactivity is the characteristic of text. In contrast, discourse, which may be spoken, written, visual, and audio, it communicates information that is interactive in nature. Now, how this interaction happens? This is something very, very important. Suppose I'm reading a novel and as a character, sometimes we identify ourselves with a character. Why do we identify with a character? Because the character as described or depicted by the author becomes live on the pages of the novel, and you start identifying yourself with the character. So you are not reading the text, you are actually responding to the text. You are actually recreating the text. You are identifying yourself with the character. So you are recreating the universe of discourse. Author has given you text, and you are converting that text into your own universe of discourse. And this is how interactivity begins. And here the element of discourse sets in. So we begin with text, but it gets converted into discourse. Text is static. Discourse is dynamic. A text is a linguistic object. That is an independent sequence of sentences that is coherent and more or less cohesive. The coherence of the sentences is the result of their common topic and logical order. The cohesion is determined by how the sentences are linked together, like pronouns, structure words, and use of tenses, and so on and so forth. The meaning of a text is the product of the meaning of its composing sentences and the way they are ordered and linked together. Whereas discourse is the actual involvement of the reader, actual response of the reader, actual action of the reader. When you look at text as a discourse, the writer and the reader both are co-creators, both are equal participants, both are active participants. The conventional way of looking at reader as a passive respondent or a passive reader is not acceptable here. And normally this is what happens. That is how literature becomes an enjoyable business. So a text studies the structure and meaning of abstract constructs devoid of their context. Discourse analysis studies how linguistic objects, including texts, are used in context and how this context determines the meaning they acquire. So discourse takes you into the context, takes you beyond the words, and establishes links with the context. A very simple example. If you look at an iceberg in the vast seas, captains of seas, they normally keep an eye on icebergs because icebergs pose a serious threat to the seas. Actually, the captain sees only the tip of the iceberg. And from the tip of the iceberg, the captain tries to gauge or measure or imagine the volume of the iceberg, how big it must be, how solid it must be, what a big threat it poses. Words are something similar like the tip of the iceberg. Every word is the tip of the iceberg. And what you need to do is to explore into the submerged portion, that is the context, and establish links between the tip, that is the word, and the context. It may be cultural context, it may be psychological context, it may be social context, it may be linguistic context. Context also is a varied thing. And by establishing these links, you are arriving at meaning and you are generating meaning. So that is how discourse works. A text can be defined as an object that can be read, whether it is a work of literature, a lesson written, or a street sign. It's a coherent set of signs that transmits some kind of informative message. But discourse is a system of thoughts composed of ideas, attitudes, courses of action, beliefs, and practices that systematically construct the subjects and the worlds which they speak. So this is the distinction between text and discourse. Now let us see how discourse analysis works. Discourse analysis is defined in Oxford English Dictionary as a method of analyzing the structure of texts and utterances, taking into account both their linguistic content and socio-linguistic context. This is what Oxford English Dictionary says. Linguistic content and socio-linguistic context. The socio-linguistic context I'm going to bring in every now and then here onwards. So discourse analysis aims at the way language is used and the way meanings are constructed. And obviously, meanings are constructed in a socio-linguistic context. This process involves delving into social and cultural background of discourse. So gradually we are moving towards culture, and culture is central, as I've been saying right from the beginning. It's a qualitative and interpretive method that does not only help us to arrive at authentic and appropriate meanings, but also makes us realize the cultural force of discourse. Discourse is a very powerful thing. And if you look at literature as discourse or literature as social discourse, then you realize from where literature gets the social force. Seen thus, literary discourse no more remains a product like text. Text is a product. Product is static. So literature is no more product, but becomes an action, having a potential to transform the reader. You often have noticed that one book read carefully transforms you. So that book is not a text, it's discourse. And that discourse turns into action. And action is something that brings about a change. Action is defined in the same way. In fact, in philosophy, an act is defined as something done in order to bring about a desired change. So if one book transforms me and there onwards my life is different, means that book has become an action. And it is not a book, it is not a text, it's the discourse. And therefore, discourse and discourse analysis are very, very useful disciplines from our point of view and from everyone's point of view. The roots of discourse analysis can be seen in the general exploration of the relation. And I'm telling a little bit of history because you as researchers also must know from where this discourse analysis came and how it developed. So the roots of discourse analysis are seen in the exploration of relationship between language and culture. And this was first done by Jellig Harris in 1952. In fact, Harris used this term for the first time, the term discourse analysis. Harris was a linguist best known as striving for a rule-oriented approach to grammar. In fact, there are two schools, rule-oriented and principle-oriented. And in pragmatics, discourse analysis, and intercultural communication, we are more concerned with principles rather than rules. So Harris belonged to the old generation. But after Harris, Goffman, Himes, Wittgenstein, Coulthard, Van Dyck, all these scholars, they brought in a lot of views and perceptions on discourse analysis. And that is why we look at discourse analysis today as a phenomena or as a method or as a process that helps us understand cultural context, social context, and create meaning out of these contexts. Erving Goffman, a well-known sociologist again, elaborated a series of concepts that have had long-lasting impact on the field of discourse analysis. Linguists like Dale Himes and Gumpers and Erwin Tripp, all instrumental in the development of the ethnography of speaking, were associated with Goffman at Berkeley. There was a group called Goffman at Berkeley. This group also included the early advocates of studying intercultural communication within the field of communication. So this is how the concept of discourse analysis grew and intercultural communication set in. And I'm going to talk about how intercultural communication also, the theories of intercultural communication also developed. In discourse analysis also has a strong European root. The philosopher like Ludwig, now these are European people, Ludwig Wittgenstein began exploring the nature of language games at Cambridge in 1930s and 40s. I gave you an example of chess, game of chess. The players who do not talk to each other, but a lot of things happen at their mental level. This example is given by Wittgenstein in his book titled Language Games. So he looks at communication from this language games point of view. And this is how he brings in context. Okay. But in those days, sociolinguistic context and looking at seeing literature as discourse, etc., was not fully developed. At Oxford in 1950s and 60s, J.L. Austin and H.P. Grice. They explored the uses of language. And Austin was the first philosopher who gave us a slogan kind of thing. That is, speaking is doing. In fact, today we find it easy to understand. But imagine in 1962 when he said speaking is doing, nobody understood him completely. People thought that speaking is using words. Speaking is passing on information. How can speaking be equated with doing? Running is doing, walking is doing, fighting is doing, playing is doing. How can speaking be doing? And that is where Van Dyck came into picture. Van Dyck defined act. He defined action. He defined different aspects of an act. And then when Van Dyck gives us a perception of act in his own way with three parts of an act. One part is, I have an intention as an actor, some intention in my mind. I put that intention into my words. That is, I imply something into the words. And those words have an impact on the listener. So my intention through those words reaches to the listener. So any speech act, and he calls this a speech act. Any speech act has three parts, right? The first one is called locutionary. The second one is called elocutionary. And the third one is called perlocutionary. These are the words used by Austin, Searle, and others. So this is an act. And precisely for this reason, speech also is an act. Because when I speak something, for example, if some of you are teachers, when you go to your class and you cut a joke, the serious students under stress, they start smiling. So imagine you have transformed them just by cutting a joke. It may be a silly example, it may be kind of gossip, or it may be anything else. But you have lightened the classroom. This is how speech becomes an act. So act performs some function. It has an impact. There is some result that you see by your eyes. And that is why speech is an act. Or if students are creating noise in the class, and if you just speak two words, shut up, the class will be absolutely serious. So speech, this is how speech is an act. And every utterance can be seen as a speech act. This is what we get from Austin, Grice, Searle, Wittgenstein. In fact, I have a very interesting example here. In fact, this fits into my way of looking at pragmatics. And the example is from an Indian poem written by Nissim Ezekiel, one of the most celebrated Indian poets in English. He wrote a poem called Goodbye Party to Miss Pushpa T.S. Miss Pushpa T.S. is the name. And the whole village is singing in a chorus. You know, chorus, group song. They all are singing in a chorus, and they are singing for saying goodbye to Miss Pushpa T.S. because she is going abroad, okay, to some other country for studying, higher studies. And this is the poem written in a context of pre-independent India, before 1947. In those days, anybody going abroad means going to England and coming back from England. So we used to call them foreign returned. Okay, and any foreign returned person in India in 1940, 48, 49, 50 was like a god or goddess, because very few people got an opportunity to go abroad. And our dear sister is departing for foreign. Imagine. Now, this is an example of bad English, apparently, right? Very bad English, because she is your dear sister, right? And dear sister is departing. If you look up a dictionary, the meaning of departing is very bad, right? Departing means dying, right? That's the meaning of departing if you look up a dictionary. Even the word foreign is bad. You would be surprised, Government of India banned this word foreign. Instead of that, Government of India ordered all the universities in our country to use the word international, not foreign. Because if you are unwell and if you go to a doctor, doctors often say that there is foreign body in your body, that is virus. So the word foreign also has negative connotations. Departing also has negative connotations. And this poet who uses impeccable English, excellent English, and he begins his poem with this line, "Our dear sister is departing for foreign," knowing fully well that this is not good English. Now the question is, why does he write like this? If you look at India, Dr. Kampi had been to India for several years, and he knows that any young girl in a village is sister for the whole village. Any old woman in a village is mother for the whole village.
Yeah.
Any old man with gray hair like me is uncle for the whole village. So we use kinship terms in extended senses, right? Mother, father. Suppose you board a bus and an old lady boards after you and she has no place to sit in the bus. You instantly stand up and tell that lady, "Mother, please sit here." Now she is not your mother, okay, obviously. But because she's old,
Yeah,
you
same,
her as mother.
same. Yeah.
So look at the cultural implications and how culture plays in the in any communication. And that is why our dear sister. Actually, she is nobody's sister. The whole village is saying she is dear sister, our dear sister. 200 people are saying dear sister. This cannot happen in America. This cannot happen in United Kingdom. There they will say your sister or my sister. She can't be our sister, you know. But in Asian countries, this is very common. Especially in India, she is our dear sister. Now, look at the words, departing and foreign. She is departing because English came to India through the Britishers. And these Britishers first laid down railways for consolidating their power. And at every railway station, all these railway stations were located in villages. At every railway station, there was a timetable. Departure time, arrival time. So illiterate Indians who did not know English at all very soon captured these words, arrival and departure. Arrival means coming, departure means going. You know, this is how they equated the meaning. They didn't have dictionaries, they didn't know English, they didn't know anything about English. So departing for them was a holy word. Anybody going away is departing. Why should they consult a dictionary? And that is why our dear sister is departing, right? And she is not departing for a neighboring village. She is departing for foreign, matter of pride for us. Foreign means England. Foreign returned. Even today, when I visit my small village, my native place, it's just a 5,000 location populated village. Almost half the village asked me a question. Are you foreign returned? You know, this is a very common question. Are you foreign returned? Because most of the villagers still don't get opportunity to see the aircraft. They have never flown. They have never traveled abroad. So they're fascinated by this idea, foreign returned. And when I say, yes, I'm foreign returned, they look at me like a god or some great saint or something, and they're ready to touch my feet, you know, as if I'm the holiest person on the earth. So this is how communication is contextual. This is how communication is basically cultural. This is how communication goes beyond words. This is how communication is not related only to structure. And that is what discourse analysis does. That is what pragmatics does. And we need to understand this phenomenon very carefully before we move on to intercultural communication. So this is what I mean by discourse analysis. Now let us look at intercultural communication. I'll introduce it for some time and then we'll take a break for 5 to 10 minutes. Intercultural communication, as we saw at the beginning, can be defined as the sharing of information on different levels of awareness between people with different cultural backgrounds. Now, I give you an example of Indian culture by way of discussing the first line of that poem. Our dear sister is departing for foreign. I am sure every culture has its own nuances. Every culture has its own habits, its own worldview. Every culture has its own characteristics. And trying to understand those characteristics, trying to understand those nuances, trying to understand those differences, trying to recognize those differences, trying to respect those differences, and then creating meaning, that is shared meaning, is what intercultural communication aims at. Okay, so it's a very complex phenomenon. Speaking is easy, making sense becomes very difficult. I sometimes wonder, if I meet someone from South Africa, for example, all of a sudden at the airport or at a railway station, I wonder how I communicate with him or her. Should I offer coffee or tea? What would he like? Coffee or tea? Because I know nothing about the person. I know no background. I know no cultural makeup. So what should I do? What question should I ask? So, this gives rise to anxiety and a variety of problems, which I'm going to discuss a little later. So this is how understanding, recognizing, then developing shared knowledge is a very complex process. It's important to be aware that each culture may have different social conventions. It's very important. This is basic. American business partners, for example, prefer small talk to build a relationship. I have given you in a tabular form here. American business partners, for example, prefer small talk to build a relationship. In Shakespeare's plays like Macbeth and Hamlet and King Lear and Julius Caesar, every play begins with gossip. Gossip of common men, like sentries and sepoys and ordinary men. Okay. So every country has some specific habits and ways of looking at life and culture. I mean, their culture determines how they behave, how they perform, how they use language. The Brits, that is UK people, may try humor to build relationship. Okay. If Americans use small talk, Britishers use humor. They'll cut a joke or use some humor in order to build relationship. The Germans tend to get straight to the point, direct approach, without beating around the bush, very direct. Thais, on the other hand, think of asking what are considered rather than personal questions in the Western world. For example, about your marital status or job. I hope I'm right. If I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm making a statement on your behalf now. Similarly, Americans like to use first names when addressing others. I had been to America almost 7 to 8 times. Even a child calls me by my first name, Ashok. That doesn't happen in India. In India, people call me sir, they call me Professor Thorat, they call me Mr. Thorat, they call me Thorat sir, they call me Thorat Sahib, but nobody calls me by my first name. But in America, even a small child calls me by my first name, Ashok. And then I have to bear, I have to understand because I'm in a different culture. This is my usual experience. Just 2 months ago, I was in America. I met one of my friends called Todd Harper, and his wife addressed me as Ashok. So initially I felt quite amused, but then I got used to it very soon. So they normally address using first name, while Austria, title should be used to avoid sounding disrespectful, like Dr. Ashok Thorat or Mr. Ashok Thorat. Germans will want to shake hands, okay, to establish relationship, while people in Thailand place their palms together, right? Sawadee-kam. I love Thai Airlines for this only, Sawadee-kam. And it's so sweet and so beautiful that you feel as if you're in heaven. It's a beautiful way of establishing relationships. So each culture has its own way of welcoming people, establishing relationships, sharing information, and creating meaning. In a business context, it is also interesting that different cultures prefer a different presentation style. In Australia or United States, for example, they are more forward-looking and like to focus on potential future benefits of products and campaigns. In contrast, representatives from countries such as China and India will prefer to go over past achievements to establish credibility. For example, India will boast of what Jawaharlal Nehru did, what IITs did, what our steel industry did, what our coal industry did over the past 50 years. Whereas Americans will say how we are going to send human beings to the moon, to the Mars, to the, so they are future centric. Whereas Indians and Chinese, they build on their past achievements. This knowledge can make or break relationships and business deals. So imagine how intercultural communication is important. It's crucial, not only in understanding each other, not only in meaning making, but achieving your goals. It may be business, it may be teaching, it may be any field of life. Now, one of the most tricky thing is non-verbal communication, because here it is very difficult to really understand the cultural differences. Non-verbal communication, frankly speaking, is as tricky to navigate as verbal communication. In many countries, giving a thumbs up sign like this is a positive expression that signals agreement, right? Suppose you say, sir, discourse analysis is a very useful method of study. And if I say like this, that is, I agree with you. Okay. But in some cultures, like Japan, Indonesia, and Latin America, this is treated as offensive. So if you do like this, they will treat it as an insult. Okay, so you can't do it in Japan. You can't do it in Indonesia. You can't do it in Latin America. Similarly, eating with hands, for example, in India, we eat with hands. Dr. Kamfi is very familiar with this. In India, we don't use spoon and fork. We eat with hand. In hotels, of course, we use spoon and fork, but at home, we eat with hands. This is perfectly acceptable all over India, but it is considered rude in many other countries. You can't do this in America. You can't do this in Australia. You can't do this in UK. You can't do this in South Korea, because in South Korea, they use sticks, right? So whether it is eating, whether it is clothing, whether it is using language, whether it is any kind of verbal and non-verbal behavior, you need to understand the cultural contexts, the worldviews, the ways of life, the belief systems, the traditions, including faiths and places of worship and ways of worship. Since communication is the mutual creation of meaning, and culture is the coordination of meaning and action in a group, it follows that intercultural communication is the mutual creation of meaning across cultures. This means that intercultural communication is a mechanism whereby people of different groups perceive and try to make sense of one another. While there is no guarantee that people will be respectful of the differences they encounter in this process, it is certainly a criteria of good communication that people seek to understand the intentions of each other in non-evaluative ways. This is something very important, non-evaluative ways. Or I would say, don't be judgmental, right? Some people have a habit of being judgmental. You are right, I am wrong, or I am right, you are wrong. You know, this you have to avoid in intercultural communication in any circumstances. For that reason, intercultural communication incorporates particular strategies that encourage us to attribute equal humanity and complexity to people who are not part of our own group. So mutual recognition, mutual understanding, and avoiding the value of humanity and recognizing the value of cultural diversity, these create a foundation for a successful intercultural communication. The most common tactical goal of intercultural communication is to inform one-way cross-cultural adaptations in situations such as teaching in multicultural classrooms or providing social services like policing, etc., in multicultural communities, traveling for business or pleasure, and some kinds of international study. In those cases, sojourners need to recognize cultural differences that are relevant to short-term communication to predict misunderstanding that may rise from those differences. Central to this application is having a good system for identifying cultural differences that are relevant to communication. Whatever system is used, the outcome of employing tactical intercultural communication is generally to decrease stereotyping of cultures encountered, increase knowledge of cultural differences, and broaden the behavioral repertoire of the adapters. Now, stereotyping cultural encounters is very bad because culture is a dynamic phenomenon. Every culture changes, transforms as time passes. And therefore, if you have some, let us say, knowledge about American culture of the 1950s, today you may go wrong. Or let us say, I have my own perception of Chinese culture of the 1920s or 1940s. Today, I may be wrong. So you need to be flexible and you need to be really flexible enough to understand how it has changed, how it has been evolving. And therefore, stereotyping is a bad idea, right? Never stereotype the other culture. The most strategic application of intercultural communication is to derive the value of cultural diversity. This is something very, very important. This has long been the goal of multicultural societies. And it more recently is being touted by global corporations, especially the multicultural corporations, which operate in different countries in different cultures. After some mistaken hope that diversity in itself generates value, it is now accepted that cultural diversity creates the potential, but not the actuality of added value. The potential of diversity is to offer alternative perspectives and approaches to tasks, thus contributing to innovation and creativity. So this is how I'm looking at cultural communication, intercultural communication. We'll take a break for 5 to 10 minutes and then I'll talk about barriers and some other aspects of intercultural communication. And then I'll sum up. I'll also try to give you a brief account of how intercultural studies developed all over the world. Okay. So shall we take a break for 4-5 minutes or would you like to raise some questions before I break? Whatever you feel.
So if you have any question.
Yeah, if you have any questions or anything to add or suggest or give an example or raise a query, we can utilize 5-10 minutes for that.
So shall we have our 10-minute break?
So, having discussed the pragmatics, discourse analysis, intercultural communication, now let us look at the barriers to intercultural communication. There are four major barriers for intercultural communication. Several others can be listed, but these four are the major ones which every one of us need to understand. And the most common or most challenging is the ethnocentrism, which is the common but misguided assumption of a cultural group that it is superior to other. That is other cultural groups. Sometimes this is also dubbed as racial consciousness or race consciousness, and which normally we experience in different cultures or different countries. For example, if Asians travel to United States or United Kingdom, sometimes they say that they experience some kind of this consciousness at the racial level. And this is not only prevalent in UK or America or certain developed countries, it's prevalent everywhere, even within countries. India, for example, is a multicultural country. Some races consider themselves superior to the other races, okay? Because every country is a mix of cultures and subcultures. And therefore, one of the threats or one of the challenges or one of the major barriers for intercultural communication is ethnocentrism. Each cultural group, having born into a particular culture and having imbibed that culture right from childhood, ultimately ends up with this belief that I am superior, my culture is superior. And this becomes a barrier for intercultural communication. So we as learned people need to guard against ethnocentrism. Or in order to make intercultural communication successful or fruitful, we need to overcome this ethnocentrism. Another barrier is assuming that other cultures are similar rather than different to your own. So look at the two extremes. One is my culture is superior, which is a threat to intercultural communication. The other is all cultures are the same. This is giving too much license to yourself, considering that every culture is the same. Indian culture and Thai culture are the same. Indian culture and American culture are the same. Indian culture and Chinese culture are the same. You cannot give so many concessions. You need to recognize the differences. So this is the second barrier. Often what happens, out of enthusiasm, you start looking for similarities. And if you find 1, 2, 3, 4 similarities, then you say, or you conclude that the cultures are the same. There are more similarities than differences. And as a result, you might behave as if you are in your own culture and end up causing offense or worse, simply because you are unaware that different rules and norms apply in the other culture. So you are blindfolded towards the differences there, right? So therein lies the danger. And therefore, wisdom lies in knowing that there are differences and then recognizing those differences, respecting those differences, and then plan your communicative strategies. Assuming that we are all the same, belong to the same culture, and then, like a naive speaker, continue the way you do in your own culture might cause harm, might cause break in the communication, This is one of the most important things that all of us have to keep in mind. Finally, the most common barrier to intercultural communication is anxiety. When you are unsure what is expected of you or what to do, it's only natural to feel anxious. You normally feel anxious in formal situations and in first encounters. I gave you an example a little while ago. If all of a sudden, I meet someone at the airport from Chile or some part of the world which I've never visited, I wouldn't know how to behave, how to communicate, which words to use, which questions to be asked. And this makes me nervous. And an element of anxiety sets in. And out of anxiety, I make more mistakes. But perhaps because out of anxiousness, you commit mistakes then. And those mistakes otherwise would have really been mitigated, but they make you feel more and more awkward. And then you almost become out of place or out of context. So the best way in such a situation is to behave naturally with a few assumptions that there are differences. Nobody is superior to nobody. Nobody is inferior to nobody. And be flexible enough to understand, recognize, value the differences. And then build your communication on these assumptions. And that is how anxiety can be reduced. So these are the four major barriers. And all these barriers occur mainly because this concept of culture. And each culture is a unique system of beliefs, unique system of living, unique system of understanding the world, unique system of conducting human relationships, unique system of using language, and unique system of your worldview. And that is culture, right? So let us try to understand what culture is actually, because I mean, in brief, the sense of culture used in intercultural communication is that of worldview. Let me clarify at the beginning. Culture is a generalization about how a group of people coordinate meaning and action among themselves. One way they do that is through institutions such as religion, politics, and economic systems, and family and other social structures. But underlying these institutions is a habitual organization of how the world is perceived. Culture basically shapes the way you perceive the world and how it is experienced. So culture is a kind of filter through which you look at the world and through which the world is understood by you. These habits are often referred to as cultural assumptions and values, and they occur in all groups, not just national societies. In general, intercultural communication focuses on this worldview aspect of culture and not so much on the institutions of culture. Human communication is conducted by people, not by institutions. The concern of any study of communication is therefore with the way that human beings organize meaning. We all are influenced by the institutional structures that we internalize as part of socialization. And understanding those institutions may give insight into how we habitually organize our perception. But in the end, it is our human worldview that generates meaning, not institutional structure. For example, if I belong to an institution in India, my institution has its own cultural setup. That should not determine my language behavior in intercultural communication. because in intercultural communication, I'm participating as an individual. And as an individual, the responsibility falls on me of developing an understanding, of probing into the differences, identifying differences, and respecting those differences. The individual responsibility falls on me, not on my institution. An essential element of culture is the boundary that distinguishes us from them. Us means my culture, them means other cultures. Every human being belongs to groups defined by boundaries. Typical boundaries are those formed by nation states like Americans and Japanese and Nigerians, or ethnic groups composed of people with particular tribal, national, or regional heritage like Kurdish, Jewish, Russian, European, African, and so on. Within a boundary, people communicate with each other differently than with people outside the boundary. In India, we do recognize this on a very, very large scale and almost every day, because we are a multilingual and multicultural country. The difference may or may not involve using a different language or jargon, but it always includes different kinds of agreements on meaning and action. A cultural boundary indicates a greater amount of interaction and need for coordination among those enclosed by it. In the case of some ethnic heritage, family interaction may be primarily responsible for preserving the cultural agreements. This is particularly true of color and race. But the ethnic boundary is a much more powerful cultural indicator than the color boundary. So, for instance, Black Caribbean Americans may experience prejudice similarly to Black African Americans. But that fact does not obviate the significant cultural differences between those two groups. In multicultural societies, national and ethnic boundaries are often combined to indicate membership in both groups. For example, African Americans, European Americans, Malay Singaporeans, Russian Kazakhstani. In addition to these common distinctions, boundaries are also formed by geographical regions within or across national boundaries, like Southern Italians, Pacific Northwest Americans, Western Europeans, Sub-Saharan Africans. Also, the boundaries of organizations often indicate very strong and distinct cultural worldviews, like corporate cultures, police culture, armed services culture, Peace Corps culture. So look how many professions, geographical, spatial, cultural subgroup boundaries are created. Service people, accountants, engineers, detectives are also likely to share a culture. Within societies, cultural boundaries may also include gender, sexual orientation, generation, and other grouping. In these and other cases, the culture is generated not by any particular belief or behavior of the group, but by the need to coordinate meaning and action among more frequently interacting people. So if you interact in a particular gender more often, you are likely to negotiate meaning and action depending on that particular beliefs of that particular or worldview of that particular group. So for instance, gay culture is not about homosexuality per se. It is about how people communicate with other people with whom they are more likely to be in contact due to shared sexuality. In this same way, some religious or political groups can generate culture, not because of their particular beliefs, but because people in the groups are spending more time and others who agree with them, with others who agree with them. One of the most important features of interculturality is the humanizing effect of worldview. Focusing on the unique experience of a cultural worldview is a direct antidote to an objectification and exploitation of people that is based simply on their color, gender, or heritage. Intercultural communication necessitates understanding the unique experience of others as the key to coordinating meaning and action towards some common goal. Another argument in favor of intercultural communication is that culture must be understood relative to its own context. Culture cannot be judged against an absolute standard of civilization. There is nothing like an absolute standard of civilization. And you cannot judge every culture against these absolute standards. And therefore, people of one culture are not intrinsically superior or inferior to people of another culture. They are just different. And this is what I've been highlighting right from the beginning. So this was, in a sense, an alarm for people who make mistake at intercultural communication level. Let us see how the intercultural communication studies evolved and developed. Because for research scholars, this might be of some interest, since they'd like to do some theoretical background also, or background studies also. While the term communication and discourse are in many ways synonymous, they reflect two different institutional and methodological approaches to how to analyze how people from different cultures communicate to each other. The study of intercultural communication had its origins in the US Foreign Services Institute strategic decision towards the end of 1940s. To embark the teaching of foreign languages to Americans. And here they realized that they needed to understand intercultural communication. The first course was titled Understanding Foreign People. In those days, the word foreign wasn't banned. Of course, even today, it is not banned in all the countries. But the course was titled Understanding Foreign People. This was in the 1940s. Anthropology was part of the program from the beginning. And an anthropologist named Edward T. Hall was associated with these programs from the beginning. By 1960, he expanded his focus on the practical aspects of teaching diplomats, international business, and other applied language teaching spheres. In his 1976 book titled Beyond Culture, Hall argues for the non-verbal, unstated realm of culture. This is the first deviation from the focus on pure anthropology. In the 1970s, universities around the country developed intercultural communication programs. For example, Arizona State University created a curriculum in intercultural communication in 1976 in order to address the needs of the state's large Hispanic population, shared border with Mexico, more than 20 American Indian tribes, and a complex, diverse enrollment. In fact, I visited Arizona State University something like 6 years ago, and I realized there is a huge Hispanic population in Arizona. So this was the proper place to launch this kind of program. Numerous textbooks on intercultural communication also began to be published. There are several titles you can browse, like Harms in 1973, Smith in 1973, Rich in 1974, Yosef in 1975, Kogel in 1976, Newmark and Blake in 1979. There are dozens of books on intercultural communication studies. While the field of intercultural communication began as an interdisciplinary enterprise with multiple theoretical perspectives, approaches began to solidify by the late 1970s. Erving Goffman, Asante, Newmark, Blake, and Budikunst are a few names that can be mentioned in this context. The 1989 Handbook of International and Intercultural Communication, co-edited by both Asante and Budikunst, is a landmark in this respect. Handbook of International and Intercultural Communication, published in 1989, is considered as one of the basic sources of intercultural communication studies. So this is how the intercultural communication studies developed. Now, where did discourse analysis and intercultural communication studies meet? Works quite separate still continue to be published in the 1990s and 2000s in both intercultural communication and discourse analysis. That is obvious. Discourse analysis continued to reflect the areas laid out by Michael Stubbs and Van Dyck towards the end of the last century. Linguistic analysis, conversation analysis, and speech events by Schifrin and Hamilton and others. One of the major developments of the 1990s, however, was the beginning of a formal recognition of interconnectedness of the fields of intercultural communication and discourse analysis. Ron Skolin and Suzanne Wong Skolin I'll just repeat the names. Ron Skolin and Suzanne Wong Skolin, following up their 1981 work on inter-ethnic communication and long-term field work in Alaska, China, and the Pacific Rim, published a series of books on intercultural communication and became recognized within the field of discourse analysis as experts on intercultural communication. So this is how the intercultural communication studies and discourse analysis started merging with each other. And the importance of this discourse-oriented work in the field of intercultural communication is evident in the Conference on Intercultural Dialogue held in Istanbul in 2009. In fact, the year 2009 is very important because this also, the same conference in Istanbul also gave rise to digital humanities, but that's a separate issue. Wendy Leeds Hurwitz and Nazan Haidari led a committee of scholars from the United States, Israel, France, and Hong Kong that called for papers on intercultural communication in various cultural, social, historical, and political contexts, and to explore ways of understanding and managing productively interactions through dialogue. This is how intercultural communication has emerged as a field that has taken a variety of theoretical and methodological approaches to the question of how do people from different cultural or cultures interact. And discourse analysis is a theoretical and methodological approach to specific examples of communication that can be used to analyze a wide variety of questions, but they do merge. Let us see how important is intercultural communication. Why do we really focus on this? Why do we attempt to study, understand these studies as well as intercultural communication as a phenomenon which is useful for global world today? Intercultural communication is not simply a language proficiency, okay? We've been highlighting the same. It is not simply use of language. It is not just understanding the other cultures. Yes, of course, communication requires the ability to understand language. But just think about how much of your communication with even your own friends is non-verbal. Our body language, for example, our attitudes, the rituals, from handshaking to the stink eye. So according to some researchers, 60% of all human communication is non-verbal. Now this number may vary. Some people might say that it is 50%, some might say it's 40%. But there's a large chunk of non-verbal communication. And therefore, using language or being fluent or having language proficiency is not the only thing required for intercultural communication. There are lots of other things that you need. Intercultural communication is an approach to relations among members of these groups that focuses on the recognition and respect of cultural differences. This is the highlight. Seeks the goal of mutual adaptation leading to biculturalism rather than simple assimilation. Assimilation is different and adaptation is different. Assimilation is getting merged, losing all your angularities, losing all your basic cultural traits, and you get assimilated. Adaptation is keeping your identity intact, keeping your cultural makeup intact, and then adapting with some other culture. And therefore, mutual adaptation leading to biculturalism is the best solution. This idea supports the development of intercultural sensitivity on the part of individuals and organizations to enable empathic understanding and competent coordination of action across cultural differences. Since communication is the mutual creation of meaning and culture is the coordination of meaning and action in a group, it follows that intercultural communication is the mutual creation of meaning across cultures. I think I am repeating this now because this is another important or significant point from our perspective. This means that intercultural communication is the mechanism whereby people of different groups perceive and try to make sense of one another. While there is no guarantee that people will be respectful of the differences they encounter in this process, it is certainly a criteria of good communication that people seek to understand the intentions of each other in non-evaluative ways. And for that reason, intercultural communication incorporates particular strategies that encourage us to attribute equal humanity and complexity to people who are not part of our own group. The most common tactical goal of intercultural communication is to inform one-way cross-cultural adaptations in situations such as teaching in multicultural classrooms and social services that I already mentioned earlier. And in those cases, sojourners need to recognize cultural differences that are relevant to short-term communication, to predict misunderstanding that may arise from those differences, and so on and so forth. A more substantial practical goal of intercultural communication is to contribute to the success of cross-cultural projects such as transferring knowledge, conducting long-term business, or effecting change through community development projects. And the last strategic application of intercultural communication is to derive the value of cultural diversity. The potential of diversity is to offer alternative perspectives and approaches to tasks, thus contributing to innovation and creativity. However, the actuality is that diversity is frequently suppressed or eliminated in the name of unified action. My way or the highway, that is the dictum. This is particularly notable in immigration policies and in corporate mergers and acquisitions, where the rhetoric of added value is generally at direct odds with the practice of demanding assimilation to the stronger culture. If you look at visa policies of different countries, you would realize it follows the dictum my way or the highway. There is no compromise. For example, if I apply for an American visa and if it is rejected, I cannot demand an explanation. I cannot seek rectification. So it's my way or highway, And this is not in favor of intercultural communication. Assimilation destroys the potential for added value from diversity. One-way adaptation preserves the potential of added value, but it does not actualize it. Only mutual adaptation can generate third cultures that support the coordination of cultural differences, and it is from those coordinated differences that value is added. And therefore, one of the most important functions of intercultural communication is to develop the value of cultural diversity. So this is all about intercultural communication. Now I'll give you one very small example, again from Indian context, that will help you locate such examples from different cultures. And let me tell you one example of one of my German friends called Willy Van Peer from Munich. What he did, he picked up some poems from English literature, and those poems were, according to him, culture free. Normally that doesn't happen, but he tried to locate as culture free poems as possible, and gave them to students from 16, 17 nationalities to read and respond. And then he realized that even if those poems were culture neutral, the students came out with culturally bound interpretations of the poems. So he got 17 different interpretations of those poems, which were culture bound. So this is what happens, culture automatically comes in back because that is in your makeup. And I think some of the students from this batch also may try these kind of examples outside or inside Thailand and see how culture determines your response. Now, here is an example which might give you a kind of model for cultural analysis. Now, this is a very simple poem. And on the surface, Indians will easily understand this, but non-Indians will find it extremely difficult to understand. Now, look at this. I am no longer feel I am Mamta Kalia. I am Kamla, I am Vimla, or Kanta, or Shanta. And the second paragraph is, I cook, I wash, I bear, I rear, I nag, I wag, I sulk, I sag. Finished. So if you look at these two stanzas, the first stanza is nothing but names. Kamla, Vimla, Kanta, Shanta, Mamta, right? Just names. And second stanza is nothing but actions. Cook, wash, bear, rear, nag, sag, sulk, wag. Okay, just actions. So the first paragraph is the list of names. Second paragraph is list of actions or acts. And the poem ends. Now, any student might ask me a question, what does this poet wants to convey? And some people might even misunderstand this. Now, because the participants are all non-Indians, I would really like you to respond to this before I interpret it in my own way. Can you, any one of you, tell me what is the logic behind giving the list of names and list of acts? And what sense does this poem make to you? It may be random guess, it may be wrong, doesn't matter, because you may not be familiar with Indian culture. But I would like you to treat this as an exercise in intercultural communication.
Yeah, dear professor, even though I miss some parts of the PowerPoint presentation because of the internet access connection here in my local area is not stable. Right now, I'm okay. So when I have a look at this, this one, I think this represents maybe the housewife as the wife. So that kind of something like expressing herself. Yeah.
I think you are quite in line with the way we interpret this. But we need to go a little beyond this. What you say is right. But we need to go a little beyond this.
Yes, yes.
These are the names which normally are given to homemakers. I agree with you. But then why this combination of actions and these names, and why these names? Why not names of heroines from Bollywood, for example?
Maybe famous names. So for me, so actually, I'm not familiar with Indian.
I know. You are not likely to know the cultural background.
That's why, yeah. So it's a little difficult to
Yes.
express, to make a guess.
Anyone
But
else?
I get.
I wouldn't mind even if the teachers respond to this. Now look, I'll simplify for you because it's a big challenge for you. Though the words are simple and easy to understand and everything, there's nothing like complexity at structural level or semantic level. But look at the pragmatics of it now. So let us make a little bit of a discourse analysis and look at it as the tip of the iceberg, the words as tips of icebergs, and we'll now establish links in the submerged portion, that is the context. The name Kamla, Vimla, Kanta, Shanta, these are the names which are normally given to girls born in poor families in India. Okay, these are all Indian names, typical Indian names, and they are given to girls from poor families. Rich people name their daughters like Karina and Katrina, and do you know these film actresses in India? So they have all the fancy names, right? But these are traditional names. So one thing is clear from these names, whoever women are there in mind of the poet, they're all from lower middle class or poor class. So they come from maybe deprived families, from a deprived background. And look at the acts. I cook, I wash, I bear, I rear, I nag, I wag, I sulk, and I sag. These are the women who do these things throughout their lives. They only cook and wash. They only bear children and rear children. They only nag and wag their tail before their husbands. And they keep sulking and sagging throughout their life, burning inside. This is their fate. This is their plight. So it's a very sad poem which talks about the plight of deprived women, women from poor or deprived classes. Now, come to the first line, the topic, the sentence like line, I no longer feel I am Mamta Kalia. Now, Mamta is a good name. Kalia is a surname, okay? Mamta is a good name, and Mamta means love and affection. It's a good name that is given in rich class and poor class and in every class. But I no longer feel I am Mamta Kalia. This no longer is the turning point. No longer indicates, linguistically, semantically, it indicates that there is a breaking point. Before this time, there was something, and after this time, there is something else. So what is this no longer time? Before that, she was Mamta Kalia. After that, no more Mamta Kalia. Right? I no longer feel I'm Mamta Kalia. So what is that breaking point? So she was a symbol of love and affection before this breaking point, and now no more a symbol of love and affection. Because woman in traditional Indian society stands for love and affection. So she was symbol of love and affection till a particular point. Beyond that point, she no more feels that she is Mamata Kaliya. She no more is the symbol of love and affection. This no longer indicates a turning point in her life, and that turning point is marriage. Before marriage, she was a respectable lady, self-esteemed lady. She stood for love and affection. After marriage, she became just like Kamla, Vimla, Kanta, Shanta, whose fate is just to cook and wash and bear and rear and nag and wag and sulk and sag. So look at this turning point, marriage. The institution of marriage is treated as or indicated as villain in the life of a girl. You get the point? And this is what happens with poor girls in India particularly. So look at the whole culture that assigns meaning to these names, assigns meaning to these acts, which are institutional acts in Indian society, institutionalized acts. And this cultural gamut, cultural ethos gives a different meaning or connotation to the very first line. I no longer feel I'm Mamta Kaliya. So when you read a poem and make a linguistic analysis or structural analysis, it makes no sense. But if you make a cultural analysis, if you go beyond words, sorry, and treat these words as tips of iceberg and explored into the context, then the meaning emerges, which is more authentic, more convincing, more powerful, more forceful, and that is treating literature as discourse. And this is how literature becomes powerful. Literature gains its cultural force, and then it becomes action. It no more remains a product. Right? With this, I'll conclude, and I'll give you some time for questions, and we'll try to answer your questions, or you are free to add, comment, suggest, whatever you like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for an interesting lecture.
Sorry, there is some throat problem, maybe because after a very, very long gap, I spoke continuously for 2.5 hours. Normally, I speak for 1 hour, 1.5 hours. And that I usually do every day.
So shall we proceed to question and answer section?
Yeah, okay, you can ask questions, no problem.
Yeah, dear participants, now it's time for question and answer sessions.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, it's better. I did.
Professor Comfy, can I say something apart from
Yes.
intercultural communication? Because what happens, most often in ELT, because this is the ELT group, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Most often what happens, in ELT, we believe that we can't do much innovative work or creative work because ELT theories are there, ELT structures are there, ELT approaches are there, and we have to be, within that framework and everything. I believe a dry subject like grammar, for example, can also be treated in a very, very creative manner. I'll tell you one simple example. This is, of course, out of intercultural communication, but this will definitely be useful for ELT students. One of my students worked on prepositions, English prepositions. And one day, she came with some confusions, and she was confused about the use of on. You know, on is a preposition. Whether this use of on should be treated as place preposition or manner preposition or time preposition, and so on and so forth. I told her, why do you get stuck up with these categories? Can't we create some more categories? These are the categories already given by ELT experts, right? 3 types of prepositions. Then I gave her a few examples. When you use on the table, you are indicating some geometrical relationship. There's a table, and on the table, there is something, right? When you say fan on the ceiling, the geometric equation is reversed, right? In the earlier example, the table is down and something that you're referring to is on it, right? In fan on the ceiling is exactly reverse. The ceiling is up and the fan is down, okay? If you say lizard on the wall, look at the geometric relationship now. Both are parallel. That is number one. Number two, the lizard is actually moving. It is not constant. So on does not only fit into those 3 categories like place, time, and manner, but you can create 5 more categories of on. And that will be your net contribution in research. Because in research, you are supposed to create new things, new approaches, new ways of looking at things. Same thing with communication. You know, initially when I taught communication something like 30 years ago or 35 years ago, I stupidly talked about horizontal communication and vertical communication and whatnot, you know, because those were the theories, those were the words, those were the terms and concepts available to me on the basis of my own reading, which was very limited. Later on, I started thinking, experiencing, interacting with people, and I realized that this bookish knowledge doesn't help me. In fact, you would be surprised, I met an 80-year-old lady, less educated, in a small village. And when I asked her, why do you live in this village all alone at the age of 80? Why don't you go back to Mumbai where all your relatives stay? And you'd be surprised, she told me that she stays here because she has friends. Almost a dozen friends of the same age, almost 75 to 85. She feels comfortable. And then I asked her, how did you begin staying in this small village? She says, I came with my husband, that is after marriage. And in the very first month or 2, I made a couple of friends. Then we made 12 friends, 13 friends, 15 friends, 20 friends. Then we used to sit in veranda and chit chat, talk about each other's husband and mother-in-law and all the kinds of problems and where you bought this sari from and where you bought this vegetable from and so on and so forth. All this gossip created a comfort zone. And today that lady feels so comfortable, she finds meaning in her life. So look at the culture that they develop when they come together. She feels so comfortable. She says, I learned from my friends how to get a passport. I learned from my friends how to apply for visa. I learned from my friends how to travel abroad. I learned from my friends how to use working English. So imagine, beginning with gossip, this lady went on to traveling abroad. And she's so comfortable that she doesn't stay with her relatives, but she still stays there with her friends and nobody around among the relatives. So this gave, rise to thinking, what is communication after all? And that is why I developed this theory of 3 levels of communication. If you remember my second slide, 3 levels of communication: build relationship, share knowledge, and generate ideas and action. This is my model. Nobody has given this model to me. And I tested it in different situations. And I can apply for patent for this now. So this is how I feel that ELT students and research scholars should create their own models, should develop their own approach, should be as innovative as scientists. And then I think the humanities scholars will have, everything under the sky to achieve. This is what I feel. I mean, this is just by way of piece of advice to young scholars. I don't know how they take it. Yeah, go ahead with your questions.
Yes, Dean Scott, you would like to share some with Professor Dr. Ashok?
Okay, thank you, dear Professor Ashok. Thank you, Professor Intanu. And just now, I heard that say you said some girl, some names of the girl, and if they are from poor family, and you can recognize, you can tell that they are just from the poor family. And I want to know, is that common in India? We can recognize if she is rich or poor just by his name. And this is the first question. And the second question is, this culture is remaining or it's changing? Thank you very much.
Your name is Scott or Crystal?
Yeah, you can call me Scott. Scott is my English name.
Yes, Scott. I liked your question and let me respond to it in my own way now. In India, in fact, we work against Shakespearean philosophy of names. Shakespeare says, what's there in a name, right? Call rose by any other name and it will smell as sweet as it smells, right? In India, it is exactly contrary. Everything is in the name. The moment you mention your name, we know the caste of the person, we know the profession of the person, we know the social status of the person, we know the financial status of the person. We can also tell who would be the relatives of that person. And not only that, we can also mention the geographical location of a person by name. So names are rooted into Indian geography, Indian culture, Indian psyche, Indian social system, Indian economic system. So if you take the names of, let us say, Modi and Shah and Jain, everyone would say this is the business community. Right. So everything is in name in India. And that is why Indians have a habit of asking the name first. Suppose I come to Bangkok and I happen to meet any one of you at the airport. The first thing I'll ask is, what's your name? Because in India, it makes sense. It gives me a lot of information about the person if you just mention your name. It may not happen in China. It may not happen in Thailand. It may not happen in England. It may not happen in America. And that is why throughout my speech, I have highlighted the need to recognize the differences or uniqueness, the need to respect those differences, the need to understand the connotations or nuances of those differences, and then develop humanity, that is tolerance, and then adaptability, not assimilation. I never encourage assimilation. Now, I met Chinese people in America. I met Chinese in UK. I met a few Chinese even in India. And now I am talking to a Chinese online. But I have never seen this kind of uniqueness with, with names particularly among the Chinese. But in India, yes, the names means everything for us.
And the tradition of the meaning of the name still keep still, right? It doesn't change.
Gradually, the things are changing, of course, because anyway, under globalization, everything is undergoing change. And especially Bollywood, the film industry, influences the society a lot. Particularly the middle and lower middle class is tremendously influenced by films. So people have started picking up names from films now. Now, my name is Ashok because my father knew only King Ashoka. Do you know King Ashoka? A Buddhist king in India who actually spread Buddhism in Thailand and various other Myanmar and various other countries. And that King Ashoka was very, very popular in India. I mean, ancient India. My father, being a teacher, was hugely influenced by the King Ashoka and his works. So I was named Ashok. You know? But now the people have started naming their children after the names that they see in films, Hindi films. So things are changing.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers. It seems very interesting for me, and I think it's also interesting for my friend. Thank you very much. This is the first question, and the second question is just now we talk about gossip, and gossip means meaningless talk. It doesn't convey any meaning.
Yes.
But you also mentioned that in Romeo and Juliet and Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's plays, said there are many occasions the gossip appears in the play, and usually in the beginning of a play.
Yes.
And I want to know what is the role does the gossip play in the famous, say, Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet? So what is the role does a gossip play, and why Shakespeare used the gossip as the beginning, in the beginning of that play? Thank you very much, Professor.
No, there are 2-3 reasons that Shakespeare uses gossip. One is Shakespeare wants to create the impact of contrast. So most of his tragedies begin with common men gossiping. Those common men are actually not recognized people, not valued people. They're all secondary citizens of that particular situation, okay? And whatever they talk, that also is not a serious talk. That is gossip, almost meaningless. Against this meaningless, against this commonplace, against this general, against this lack of taste, when Hamlet appears, Hamlet looks taller. A big man, a great man. This is the contrast. So this is one impact. He creates contrast in order to enhance the image of his main heroes. Number one. Number two, these heroes, they belong to palaces, kingdoms, and their own families, which are respectable, and they're busy with, business that belongs to a higher section of the society. These common people, they talk about mundane things, like who talked to whom and who bought something from where and what you did yesterday and where you were sitting with someone and drinking with someone and something of that kind, right? So from this seemingly nonsense talk, you understand how the common man leads the life, how the ruled people, there are rulers and there are ruled, right? Rulers are Hamlet and Macbeth and these people, and these ruled ones, the common people, what is their mindset? Why the rulers are successful? That can be located into this gossip, why the rulers are successful, why they are powerful, how they can control the ruled ones. Because these people have no mental ability or intellectual ability to rise, to become leaders, to become knights, or to become kings or princes. So they remain at that level and it is easier to rule them. So he also creates a fertile background for the rulers to appear as legitimate rulers. because most of his plays are based on feudal system. There are feudal landlords, there are feudal kings. So contrast is one thing. Secondly, who is the ruler and who is the ruled and for what reasons and how and why. And thirdly, you understand the overall culture, because these common people also talk about the rulers. These common people talk about Hamlet. They talk about Hamlet and Ophelia relationship. They actually whisper into each other's ears because they are not supposed to speak about this in open. That would be treated as defiance. So they whisper into each other's ears. So through this whispering, we also understand the background of the rulers. How good they are, how bad they are, how vicious they are, how generous they are. So this gossip also is a comment on the culture and behavior of the rulers. And therefore, gossip in Shakespeare's plays has been very intelligently planted, exploited, and appropriated.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's a very, very interesting explanation of the gossip of Shakespeare. I never, pay any attention to the gossip. I just say it's a common sentence. And from your explanation from 3 different parts, I get really very deep understanding of Shakespeare play. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dear professors, we have a question in the chat by Dr. Suraj Ray. So what he English being taught in India universities is basically mostly taught as literature only, not as language. As all English undergraduate and postgraduate students will teach English, will learn English in a class in their career, why no ELT components are there in the undergraduate and postgraduate courses? And secondly, the question, shouldn't cross-cultural understanding be there in the undergraduate and postgraduate courses?
I can read only the last 3 lines. Cultural understanding be there in the UG and PG courses, right?
Yeah, shouldn't cross-cultural understanding be there in the course in the undergraduate postgraduate courses?
English being taught in Indian universities is basically and mostly taught as literature only, not as language, as all English UG and PG students will teach. Cultural understanding be there in the UG and PG courses, right? Is this the same, or because I'm getting it a little in a disjointed form? But anyway, just a minute. I'll just scroll down and let me check if I get it in a clear sequence. But I think I got the question. As all English UG and PG students will teach English in the class in their career, why no ELT components are there in the UG and PG courses? This is for Indian students, right? Well, the answer is very simple and straight. National education policy that has been implemented in India from 2023 onwards is promoting the skill-based approach and teaching language skills, communication skills, intercultural communication skills, all are going to constitute a part or complete 2 credit or 3 credit or 4 credit course in Indian universities here onwards. So teaching language through literature, which has been done so far, may start changing here onwards. I mean, I'm sure it will definitely start changing onwards. And I personally feel that even as a student of literature, you cannot say that you are not a student of language, because literature uses language as raw material. And if you have noticed throughout my speech, I gave examples from literature. But I look at those literary pieces as socio-linguistic facts. Or I look at those literary pieces as discourse. So this is the linguistic way of looking at literature. If you just look at literature as a post-colonial thing or feminist thing or Marxist thing or something of that kind, you remain at literary literary criticism level, right? But if you study words, if you study the context of every literary piece, because literature also doesn't come from a vacuum. It comes from a culture. It comes from a context. No author is born in vacuum. He is also a product of a culture. And therefore, ultimately, language, literature, and culture, they are intimately related with each other. They're interconnected, inseparable. And therefore, looking at literature as something as only literature and language as something as only language is not a very good way of treating these subjects, because these are very vital issues in our life. Forget about teaching alone. So teachers have to be conscious of the fact that they are dealing with literature, they're dealing with language, they're dealing with culture at the same time. And therefore, they have to be multidisciplinary at the same time. And these elements need to be introduced not only in the syllabus, but even in the teaching practices. So even when you are in the classroom, you should actually make a discourse analysis of a literary piece. That helps students gain more insights and perhaps better skills of reading than just creating critical summaries or developing critical approaches, though they are important in a sense. I am not denying the importance of critical approaches, but then you also need to look at literature as a social linguistic fact. And thereby you understand the cultural force behind that piece of writing. If I give you a very simple example from a novel of Kanthapura, a novel of Rajarao by titled Kanthapura, one statement I came across there, I mean an utterance, and the utterance is very simple. I ate your salt. Remember, I ate your salt. Salt is something that you add to food every day, right? Now, what is this? I ate your salt. This is rooted in India, because in Indian culture, in Marathi we say "mi meat khalla tumcha." In India, anybody who eats food in somebody's house has to remain loyal to that person till the end of life. Remember, if anybody feeds you, even once, you have to remember that favor throughout your life and remain loyal to that person or to that family. And that is why we say, I ate your salt. That is, I ate food in your house, and that's why I will never betray you. It's a promise. Apparently, that sentence will be misinterpreted by every non-Indian, right? But Indians, especially South Indians, will understand this, that this simple utterance of 5 words means that lifelong I am your friend. I'll never betray you. I am with you. So can you teach literature in the absence of culture or cultural values or cultural context? And it is a word that takes you to the culture. So this link that you have to establish between the word, the tip of iceberg, and the whole cultural context is pragmatics, right? And this is what you need to understand as a teacher of English or teacher of any language. I mean, it's not only related to English, it's related to Hindi, it is related to Thai, it is related to Korean, it is related to Chinese. Every word is symbolic. It's just a symbol. It stands for something else. And that something else is more important than the symbol. Symbol is just something that you see by your eyes. The context you need to explore. And therefore, this process of exploration, which is known as pragmatics or discourse analysis, constitutes a very important part of a teacher in any class, at any level, in any country of the world.
Vivian, can you share with Professor Vivian? You have any share with Professor Dr. Ashok?
Okay, thank you, professors. Thank you for your informative lecture. I have one question.
Yes.
I am always confused about these three terms. The first one, intercultural, the second one, multicultural, and the last one,
Cross-cultural.
communication. I'm always confused.
I think as a communicator, you communicate with someone on one-to-one basis. And that is what we refer to as intercultural communication.
Oh,
When you think of multicultural communication, you have in your mind different cultures, and then you are planning your strategies in a different way. Okay, so it is different from cultural studies. They focus on comparing and contrasting differences and similarities. Oh, this internet is unstable. What? I hope you're getting me. Are you getting me?
Can you say again, sir? Maybe because unstable internet, that some word are missing.
Yeah.
Your speech.
Perhaps. But these three are different terms, okay?
Yes, maybe I need to read more.
Yeah, even I can throw more light on this.
Yeah, to read more to differentiate these three terms.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, because my signal is not too stable.
Maybe because your voice gets, breaks sometimes, or I don't know whether it's from my end.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Crystal, would you like to share some?
Yes. Crystal?
Yes, maybe my question is not related to what we talked about today, but as an English teacher, I want to know whether it is necessary for us to guide our students to conduct some cultural reflections on themselves to cultivate their intercultural communication awareness. Thank you.
Yes, of course. I mean, you need to sensitize them to cultural differences.
Yeah.
And need to understand those differences. Not only understand, but respect those differences. Right?
Yeah.
Suppose an American says hello, hi, and you say namaskar, Indian say namaskar. You should recognize this difference as well as respect this difference. If he says hi, don't hate. Okay. And if you hold hands, don't disrespect, right? Recognize and respect. This is the basic principle of intercultural communication. I must first of all convince myself that you belong to a culture which is different from my culture. But that doesn't mean that we're enemies of each other. We understand each other, we love each other, we recognize each other, and we respect each other. That is the base of intercultural communication. And I think every teacher, not only English teacher, but every social sciences teacher, even medical sciences teacher, should imbibe this principle among the students, right?
Yeah.
Because we all are in a sense global citizens. And even if you stay in Buriram, for example, not that every resident of Buriram is the same.
Oh, yeah.
You all are unique human beings, right? You are different from each other. And you live peacefully and happily because you respect each other. You know the differences also, right? Someone is miserly, someone is spendthrift, someone is vocal, someone is not vocal, someone is extremely articulate. There are differences, right?
Yeah.
But you accept people with all those differences respect those differences and build your relationship beyond that, right? So intercultural communication also functions the same way, but at a global level, at a larger level.
Hello, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Sir, actually, while explaining the terms intercultural, multicultural, and cross-cultural, you dealt with these terms minutely and in a very simple manner so that we could understand each and everything. But I don't know whether that problem was from my side or your voice was breaking or my voice was breaking. I don't know. But I once again want to listen about cross-cultural, because you made the differences, clear differences between intercultural and multicultural. So I want to listen more about, cross-cultural.
Just one second.
Yes.
Look, I have jotted down something that might help you more.
Yes, sir.
I have already explained what is intercultural. Multicultural refers to how a group or team is composed in a particular manner, and how that is made up of people with different nationalities, and therefore communication in multicultural settings has become commonplace today. Okay.
Yes.
Cross-cultural is comparing two or more different cultures. So cross-cultural communication examines the varying communication styles of different cultural groups. So cross-cultural is like discourse analysis, is a way of examining and evaluating communication styles of different cultural groups. In intercultural communication, we do not make evaluation, we do not make judgments.
Yes, sir.
So that is the basic difference.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dear Professor, let me
Yes.
ask you a question.
Yes.
It's not so related to the pragmatics and discourse. It's something related to the poems. But in discourse, discourse is what's context dependent. You mentioned that like this. But what about the poems? So when we appreciate the poems or read and enjoy the poems, and so for some traditional poems, it's okay. We have enough understanding or grasp the message of the poet. But how can we deal with the modern poems that reflects whatever it is the idea of the poet mentioned? So how can we deal with modern poems? And dear Professor, give me some suggestion or ways to appreciate and to enjoy modern poems and to get a fully understanding of what the poet conveyed, the message that to the audience.
I think at the surface level, or whatever understanding I have about the genres, the difference between poems on the one hand side and novels and short stories, etc., on the other hand side is poems are normally dominated by some dominant emotion. The poet who writes a poem has some emotion, which is powerful emotion, and perhaps the impact of that powerful emotion makes him write a poem. Whereas in a novel, the author has a theme in mind, and then the whole larger context in mind, the characters in mind, and everything else in mind, right? Poems are normally short. Short, brisk, and they're woven around some emotion. Even if a longer piece for 2 pages, 3 pages, the emotion dominates. Now, the poets are very skillful. they often do not reveal that emotion in a simplistic way. So you have to search for it. You have to go deeper, read between lines, and try to unearth the motive of the writer, the poet. And that's why poetry becomes a formidable task. Reading poetry becomes a formidable task. Understanding novel is comparatively easy, but understanding poem is a little difficult. That is because the poet actually leaves a lot of gaps which you have to plug. Okay. And this plugging becomes a strenuous act. Reading actually is an act of plugging. And the creative writer, the more the creative writer, the more the gaps he creates or leaves. And you have to plug those gaps. And this plugging demands your cultural maturity, your linguistic maturity, your literary maturity. And therefore, poem becomes, understanding and appreciating poem becomes a difficult task. But whatever said and done, understanding poem also is a way of struggling with communication. Right? You are interacting with the text. There is a text in front of you and you are interacting with the text. You are establishing links. By establishing links, you are actually plugging the gaps. And the more successful you are there, the better text communicates with you. Right? In other words, the text of the poem becomes interactive only if you are successful in plugging the gaps. And this interactivity, as I said, is a mark of discourse. So the text of a poem gets converted into a discourse when this interactivity sets in. But for developing this interactivity, you have to work a little harder than you work while establishing this interactivity while reading novel. Right. So poetry is a formidable job. I do agree with you. And that is why it needs a little more intensive exercise. And perhaps a lot of linguistic competence is required there. And therefore, teaching poem also is a challenge for teachers. Teaching a short story or a novel is comparatively easy. So as a teacher of poetry, you may be facing these problems, but these are natural, these are universal, and the only way out is to exert. Right. There are actually books on understanding poetry, and just now someone gifted me a book in the United States. It's a beautiful book on how to read a poem. I would have handed it over to you had you been in India.
Thank you, Professor. And one more. So I read the dissertation, some dissertations. There's something related to cultural responsive pedagogies or teaching. So that's done in, especially in US, as it's a multicultural country. Mm-hmm. And so, so what come into my mind is that is it when I say applicable, that kind of when I say model or more models to use in Myanmar, but actually are in Myanmar not multicultural. But we have some ethnics. But what I want to know is that that kind of model or that kind of, when I say theory, can be used in Myanmar. So this is the question.
I think adopting models from United States or Europe is not a very good idea. It's not even practical. We in India suffered a lot because we used British models for teaching literature and language in India. And we suffered a lot.
Oh.
Yeah, even today we are trying to come out of it, but we are half successful. It's always better to teach literature by relating it to your environment.
Yeah, adapting.
Yes. And then when it comes to prescription, prescribe texts which are less culturally bound.
Oh, yeah.
Because culture is a product of soil. So if you pick up a novel or a poem from America and teach it in Myanmar, you are bound to face problems.
Yeah.
Right. We often give the simplest example of Daffodils, poem by Wordsworth. We teach in India how my heart dances with daffodils. And none of my students knows daffodils.
Yeah.
No one has seen them ever. So, you know, you have to be a little more realistic. Your job is not to teach a culture. Your job is to teach literature, teach language, and then lift them up to the level of intercultural communication. Okay. You cannot make Myanmaris like Americans. That should not be your target, right? Let the Myanmarian students be Myanmar students.
Yeah.
Let them protect their own unique character. Let them protect their own culture. So even if you teach an Indian literature or American literature or British literature, relate it to Myanmar culture, relate it to Myanmar environment, and pick up only those aspects of that literature which is relevant for you and forget about the rest. Doesn't matter, right? Be practical. Wisdom lies in that. And by doing this, the students also find that your teaching is related to their life and career. Otherwise, everything will be in the air then. Unrealistic. That's what we did in India. We taught Shakespeare for 50 years. And now we repent for that. Oh, there is internet problem again. Shreyash, internet मधून जायला लागला का? Hello? Hello?
Hello. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not stable internet, you know.
Yeah, that's fine.
I hope
But I grasp what you mean. Thanks, Professor.
This we come to an end, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay, that's I think nearly 3 hours for Professor Dr. Ashok Thorat lectures now. I think it's very
it's a marathon session.
Yes, a webinar. So we are very honored to have Professor Dr. Ashok Thorat, and we got insightful knowledge about intercultural communication in our ELT program in perspectives of pragmatic discourse analysis. And I would like to invite Professor Dr. Rajabhat Intano to give some wrap up for this webinar.
On behalf of ELT program, Faculty of Humanities and Social Science, Buriram Rajabhat University, and on behalf of our Dean, Associate Professor Dr. Akrapun, I will say thank you to Professor Dr. Ashok Thorat for your insightful talk for our ELT Ph.D. student today, right? They may be interested in ICC as well. Okay, it's time to end it. I declare to end our webinar today. Thank you all, and thank you, Professor Dr. Ashok. We hope to see you in person in the near future. Right? Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Professor Dr. Ashok.
Thank you, Dr. Kampirafa. And it was a nice interaction with the students. And it was nice to see you on the screen. We haven't met for quite some time. I hope to
Yes.
see you in February on the BRU campus.
Yes, very welcome, sir. Thank you
And
very much.
through
Thank you
Thailand,
all.
I'll fly to Vietnam then.
Yes, good
Yes.
plan.
Thank you very much. Have a nice time. Right.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
For of you, you can work at I send it to you. Please, when you finish today, you can submit for the summaries of Professor Dr. Ashok Thorat's presentation and lecture today. You can take your time in the afternoon time. Thank you very much.
So it means that no classes for afternoon?
No class. I will get PPT for you from Professor Dr. Ashok, and you can sum up.
Yeah, Professor. Please send us.
Yes. Take your time in the afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Interno. Thank you so much. It's a great chance. Thank you so much.